Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for our September webinar. Now, this topic is a little bit different from other talks that we've done before. Not so much the veterinary side of things, but more what you can have some alternatives to your fish system. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the GoToWebinar system, there is a little box on the right here that has an area for questions. Now, unfortunately, in my screen, they are very, very small. So I will do my best to keep an eye on that and answer his questions as we go. At the end, as always, I will make sure that all questions that come in will be answered. So starting off today with our topic for this week is aquaponics and fish. Today we'll be talking about what exactly is aquaponics, some different examples of aquaponic systems, and I think one of the best parts about aquaponic systems is that they can vary quite a bit. There's really very few right ways to do this. We're going to go through a quick start guide because I know a lot of you that are regular listeners actually already own fish. So it makes it a lot easier since you're already pretty good experts at how to keep your fish alive. Maintaining your aquaponic systems and troubleshooting. And just keep in mind, this is a very quick, brief overview of all these different components. At the very end of this presentation, I'll be giving you some great resources for learning more on your own. So starting out with, what is aquaponics? Defined, aquaponics is technically a derivative of aquaculture, in which the waste produced by farm fish or other aquatic animals supply nutrients for the plants that are grown hydroponically in water, which in turn then purify the water. Essentially, this system uses fish waste to grow plants. Very, very basic cycle here. You have your fish, they eat food, poop out ammonia and out their gills. This is converted by our biologic filtration into nitrates, and other components are then used to feed plants. And by those plants taking those components out of the water that's returned to the fish is safer and healthier. Now, keep in mind that this is just not a method of growing marijuana, which I'm sure some people thought when they saw the talk for this. Yes, I know I am in California, but we will be focusing on the fish side of things today. So how is aquaponics different from hydroponics? Because both use water as a growing medium. However, the big difference is hydroponics requires synthetic additives. So basically, all those fish fertilizers that you already have in a fish system need to be added artificially. And there are thousands upon thousands of different additives for hydroponic system, depending on what you want to grow, how fast you want it to grow, how dense your stocking is, if you're going for a particular varietal or flavor. But in most aquaponics facilities, you're going to be using fish-derived fertilizers, most often your nitrogen or nitrate, and your phosphates. The big kind of point for aquaponics, especially in our area of California, is that when you have less nitrate waste in your tank or pond, this can allow you to do fewer water changes and conserve some of the water that you're using. And this is great for people who have very large ponds that have to do hundreds of gallons worth of water changes every couple weeks. So again, we're looking at this more from this will save you water side of things. Plus you'll get some great veggies and teach, if you have kids, this is great for their science projects. All the teachers love aquaponics. So aquaponic setups can be used on a very large scale production. There are commercial aquaponic facilities, or they can be very small, as you can see from the tiny fish tank on the left, the right. I'm sure you've probably seen, if anybody remembers back to the Sky Mall catalog about 5 years ago when they still had those on airplanes, there was a cute little beta tank that actually had a lid with an aquaponic setup in it. Now, that's very, very small, and I don't think that one little fish is going to be able to produce enough waste to grow vegetables. But certainly we'll talk about a couple different methods in order to make this work to whatever setup that you have. Now for the commercial grow outs, they are going to be making considerable money off the vegetables than the fish. And they're usually, again, selling fish for human consumption as a derivative of aquaculture. And since the veggies are making so much more money, the environment in the aquaponics setup is going to be idealized to happy veggies, not happy fish. Tilapia is a great example of this. Tilapia are thought to be very hardy. They can put up with a lot of amateur mistakes. However, they really like temperatures that are up in the 80s. And most of these vegetables are going to like temperatures in the mid to high 70s. So keeping the fish at lower temperatures to keep the vegetables happy, you can actually see a lot more disease and stress in those fish that could lead to a product that it's going to take longer to reach market value, or they could be more susceptible to disease. Now, again, since we're coming at this from more of a hobbyist standpoint, we're going to keep the fish as happy as possible, and the veggies are just a side benefit. So now we're going to go through a couple different examples of aquaponics. Like I said to start, there are many different ways that you can go about adding an aquaponic system. Starting out with the simplest is a float. Basically, this is a brick of styrofoam that sits on the top of the water. You can see all the little plants have their own little cups there. This is just to make it easier to harvest them at that time. However, you need to make sure that if you are going to put this on top of your pond, you need to protect the roots of the plants from hungry fish. Because yes, fish like to nibble on plant roots, but they're usually just eating the bugs and other crunchy critters out of the roots. Some of them just eat it when they're bored. But certainly if you're growing veggies, they need those roots. So it's great if you can either protect those roots with a little bit of netting or keep them in an area that's separate from your fish. And we'll be explaining this a little bit more later. And then you can have beds that are either shallow or deep. Deep water beds usually use a filter media, for example, Hydroton, which is this puffed up clay that you see there on the right. Now, this is just an example. There are many, many different versions of substrate you can use. However, you want to make sure that the substrate does not degrade or leach anything into the water. Because again, your fish are in this water, you want to make sure it's safe for them. If you're using a hydroponic setup, you want to make sure that that substrate can be used for aquaponics. And if you're not sure, I suggest calling the manufacturer to make sure that they know that you're going to be using it in an aquaponics setting. This is kind of a newer market for a lot of people. Aquaponics has been around for a really long time, but hasn't really gotten much in the way of attention. So again, try to explain what you're trying to do using this for a fish safe product. And then you can do a very shallow bed. So this could be a slight trickle of water up into a few inches. What you choose, whether it's the float or the deep or shallow, will really depend on what you want to grow and how much space you have to do it in. It's very important that some of these systems allow you to cycle air and water where your grow beds will be filling and draining on a regular basis. This is done to pull air, oxygen, from the atmosphere to the plant roots and any bacteria and worms that you have down in the substrate there. One method of this is using an electronic timer. So again, very simple. They make them very easy to use these days. Basically, you time your pump to be on for a certain amount of time, fill up your grow beds, and then turn it off so everything can drain back into the sump or the fish system. Now, kind of an idiot-proof way to do this is a bell siphon or auto siphon. So on the far right there is just a media cover. So this keeps the media from getting sucked down your filter. The next part, all the way to the left, is the drain. Now that middle part sits over that end drain on the end there. And basically, as the water fills up, once it reaches the top of that white part on the left, it'll start sucking water in and go down through that tube. Now, by having that cover on it, it actually creates a pressure vacuum that'll suck water all the way down to that bottom crack down there. And basically, this will automatically fill and empty your systems without having to worry about electronic timers. Because again, timers, as great as they are, they can fail on occasion. So you can use the idiot-proof siphon. As long as you set it up correctly, it'll work pretty much forever. One of our pond guys actually out here actually made one with a 2-liter soda bottle. So lots of different ways you can make these. This is the fanciest one they have available. A lot of this is going to be DIY. If you already have a pond or a tank, which hopefully most of you do already, you're halfway there. You already have your fish system established. Whether it's a fish tank here with happy little goldfish, you can see they built a bed over this. It's probably just a little shallow bed. You can see there's a pump in the far left corner, bringing water up to those, looks like just pretty flowers, to the top. And then it's going to run through that bed and down the other side. You can see where the cap is on the far right side up by those plants. And this is a very simple and very pretty setup. But this is basically just the definition of aquaponics, is using the waste from those fish to grow yourself some very pretty flowers. And here is the pond equivalent. I'm sorry I could not find a better resolution photograph. So this is actually a bathtub suspended up over a koi pond. Now it's a little hard to see, but this is a deeper water bed. And you can see they got a big pepper plant right in the middle. So this one is going to be a little bit different, where it's going to take a much longer time for that to fill and empty. But you can see it has an intake and output right there, and it sits right on top of their pond. I have to admit, it's not the prettiest thing I've ever seen, but it looks like it's doing the job and growing a lot for them. And there are vertical systems. So if you're limited on the total square footage that you can put in for whatever system you're looking to do, you can actually make these vertical growers, which are really cool. We were lucky enough to be next to a company at the San Diego Koi Show 2 years ago that was selling a very similar system. Now with this, you can see the little spray bar across the top has the water coming in. It's going to be sprayed into these tubes and slowly trickle down to the bottom of this. And then the tube at the bottom is going to take it back to the pond or tank, whatever they have set up. Really, in this game, you want to be creative. So the one on the left here, you can get these plastic storage towers at Home Depot for about 30 bucks. And this is an example of a very shallow bed growing system. These little leafy veggies are very easy to grow. They're one of the most highly recommended ones to use. Only problem with this system is that they have no access to the fish on the bottom. So again, you got to make sure that you're able to get to the fish, but there are a lot of different examples. On the right here, you can see someone's just gone to town on these blue barrels and cut them in half, has all the plants on the top, and actually in the middle row here, they're growing crayfish. So yes, not just fish, you can actually use other aquatic animals to take the, to feed them, obviously, and then they will produce the waste that the plants need to grow. So really, the sky's the limit on this. There are lots of different methods you can use. And at the end here, I'll actually be giving you a reference for a great book that can teach you how to build all these systems. So now that we've kind of gotten you going, we're going to go through a quick start guide. So really, what do I need to get started? Well, first, obviously, you're going to need some fish. And they can be ornamental, they can be for food. It really depends on what you have available already. If you do want to get more into aquaculture, are you comfortable with dispatching these little fishies before you put them on the table? That's probably going to be one of the hardest parts. And obviously, you're going to need a place for these fish to live. Now, depending on how much room you have, if you already have a pond in place, you're going to need to consider the stocking density of these fish, and it's going to be dependent on the species. A lot of fish for aquaculture get along very tightly together. Bigger koi and goldfish, they do better with more space. Fish food, obviously, you're going to need something in order for these fish to produce waste. We'll be covering a little bit more about what type of fish food in our troubleshooting section. You're going to need a water test kit. Very, very important that you need to keep an eye on your parameters. And this is going to be a daily test that you have to administer. So get one, give it a name, learn how to love it. And obviously, the other half of this is plants and a place for the plants to live. And always want to consider the environment of the plants and the fish. Are they the same? Do they get along in the same temperatures? Do they get along in the same environment? What are you going to use to make this kind of as easy as you possibly can? A lot of people putting in a little tiny greenhouse, just for the plants, is the easiest thing to do because it will keep the plants nice and toasty and the water will be happy for the fish. Especially if you're going to add this into, say, a koi pond during the winter. Again, this is going to be a little hard to get started, but you got to make sure it's warm enough for those plants to be happy. And of course, now we got to put it all together. So plumbing components. How is your system going to run? Are they going to use grow beds that are up above your system? Is it all going to be in line? Do you need electronic timers, or do you want to use the nice little siphon? So lots of things to consider. Highly recommend drawing everything out before you get started. Now, the most important question when it comes to aquaponics is how many square feet of veggie beds do I need per gallon of water? It's very important that you are able to balance this as best as possible because you want to make sure your fish have clean water and your plants have adequate nutrition. So if you have a lot of fish and not a lot of veggies, you're going to end up still doing your water changes to get those nitrates out. But if you don't have, again, enough plants to scrub everything out, the fish are going to get sick. And if you have a lot of plants and very few fish, those plants aren't going to have enough nutrition to grow correctly. Really, the suggested beginner ratio is going to be 1-to-1. So if you have so many gallons of pond, that's exactly the same as your volumes of plant beds. They make it very easy. Again, however, this is going to be highly dependent on stocking density of your water for your fish and how much food they are fed. So that's why we have our test kits to make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be and not creeping in one direction or the other. Really, the highest recommended limit for beginners is 2-to-1. So if you have twice as many fish per grow bed, it's still going to put you okay in the right level. But again, try to look at that 1-to-1 ratio. And really, the most important thing to remember is to keep it simple to start. Again, nobody's going to jump into gardening and be great at it from the beginning and grow all these amazing veggies. Although with Miracle Grow these days, who knows? If you already have a fish system, which I'm assuming if you're a regular listener, most of you already do, your job is half done. So basically, what do you need to do to turn your fish system into an aquaponics system? Well, as you can see here in the picture, you're going to place your grow beds above the fish system. Let gravity work in your favor. This one actually has a little tiered approach where you can see all 4 of those outlets are coming back into the pond. Highly suggest using an auto siphon or the bell siphon. It's just going to be the best and safest thing for you to use. Maybe use a separate fish, You're going to want to make sure you place a pump in your fish system. Obviously, you want to get the water up to the plants. You need to protect the fish from the pump if necessary. Make sure that it has a cover on it or you put it in an area the fish cannot access. And it might be that you have to use a separate fish-free sump that pulls water from the pond and then up to the plants, kind of as a staging area for the water. And now that you have everything set up, you're going to fill your grow beds with proper media and add plants because your fish are already doing all the work, so you're pretty much good to go. And again, this is just the simplest, straightforward method that we could find. Now, since a lot of this is DIY, you might want to look at some prefab systems that are ready to go. And these are a couple different examples. The one from Inhabitant there on the far left is very pretty. However, you're not going to be able to hold a lot of fish and you're not going to have a lot of plants. Those look all plastic to me. The middle one with the little tank there, you do have to keep in mind that sometimes you will need to access your system to take care of your fish. So hopefully that insert lifts out very easily. The one on the far right is made by Pent Air, or formerly Aquatic Ecosystems. Not the prettiest system to get going, but it is the most comprehensible and will give you the most grow area and fish area. But again, these are prefab systems if you don't have the fish system set up already. I highly recommend that if you have the fish already, try to figure out something that will work with both. Don't have to make your job any harder than it is. Now, we have to talk about fish food. So it's very important that with any fish food, you pay attention to the protein levels in that food. The higher the protein, the more nitrates are going to come out of that fish. Well, first they're going to be ammonia. You got to remember our nitrogen cycle. There are commercial diets available for aquaponics and aquaculture. You do not have to use these. The diets that you use for aquaponics can be same as any other fish diets, like our koi diet there on the right. I have seen some horrific aquaponic specific diets that, yes, they're using all natural organic ingredients, but the fish are not going to be growing from this. It's missing too many key nutrients and has a lot of suspicious additives. So you do not have to have a fish food diet for aquaponics. You can use whatever you want. It's really important that you know your fish food labels. We have a specific webinar on this subject just so you can kind of figure out how much marketing is going into some of these products. Are they really good for your fish? I'm happy to consult on any individual labels if you want to send them to me. I'd prefer not to see the brand name. So now that we have our fish, we have our food, what kind of plants are we going to put in here? For beginners, this is the list that they recommend you sticking to. Leafy lettuce, kale, chard, arugula, basil, mint, and watercress. Those sound like some delicious salads to me. Once your system is more established and you've kind of gotten a little bit better hang of this, you can try some other veggies. This is where you're going to get your tomatoes, your peppers, cucumbers, beans, peas, squash, and cabbage. A couple different sites that I was reading, really the sky's the limit. Don't know how it will work on citrus because it's a little bit different soil. But again, for beginners, stick with the leafy stuff until you're really kind of in the groove. You got your system, everything's balanced out, you know what's going in, going out, and then you can make the step up to those fancier veggies. So now that we've gotten everything set up, how do we maintain this great system that we have going? It's very important that you pay attention to how much you're feeding your fish and how much fish you have packed into your bucket. Again, if these are fish that you've had a long time, you can go ahead and feed them the same way you have this whole time. Again, it might take a little while for your nitrates to build up, but again, you're going to be watching those with your water quality test kit. If you are going to be growing out for eating, obviously those fish are going to grow in size until they are market value. So when they're very small, you can pack a lot into a small area. But as they get big, you have to keep in mind that maybe they might need to be separated out a little bit. If you are harvesting your fish for food, you will need to replace your fish over time. And you can't do it all at once because if you take all the fish out of the system at the same time, there won't be any more ammonia, nitrate, and all of your plants will die. So you will need to replace your fish over time. You highly recommend that you have multiple tubs going divided by age group because everyone will kind of graduate through the system together. Some facilities do their own breeding on site. They use brood stock. Others will sell individuals directly from the hatchery, just kind of get in a batch every couple months or so. Again, depending on what species you have, it's going to tell you how fast these suckers are going to grow and how fast you're going to need to get them to market value. It is extremely important that you test your water chemistry parameters daily when you're starting out. It's even better if you can test them first thing in the morning and the evening, because you may need to manipulate how much food you're giving your fish over the course of a day, especially when you're starting out. Plant photosynthesis will change the pH of your water. Now, hopefully you have enough buffers in there to make sure that it's not swinging too far all over the place. But it's very important that you test your water chemistry parameters daily to start because there will be significant changes depending on how many veggies that you're adding to your fish system. Now, water changes. Now, we're doing all these aquaponics in order to prevent having to do water changes. However, the amount you do is going to be dependent on your plant volume to fish volume ratio. And please remember that aquaponics do not remove hormone production from your water, and this is a very hard parameter to test for. However, stressed out fish will have increased hormone production. So if your stocking density is too high, if you don't have enough plants, your water quality is going to go down. You might have reproductive issues. All of these will lead to more hormone production. And unfortunately, the plants are not going to take this out of the water. So if this is the case, you will need to perform regular water changes, just not as frequently. And again, we have our test kits, so we know when levels are getting too high. However, with stressful spawning, anything like that, it's highly recommended that you do water changes on a regular basis. Again, they don't have to be as involved or as frequent, but you're still going to have to do them a little bit every once in a while. How often you do them will depend on the specifics of your system. Is there any temperature variation between either the plants or the fish? Or if it is an outdoor pond, that's going to dictate some of the biologic activities going on. What species you're using, what sort of habitat they are in, etc., etc. There's many different ways. And again, you really want to watch your nitrate levels. At high levels, nitrates can be just as toxic as ammonia. If you are taking out plants for harvest, those little baby plants that you put back will not use as much nutrients. And again, different species of plants will vary in their usage of nitrates. So it's best to kind of play around with it a little tiny bit, but once you find that sweet spot, try to keep everything as level as possible. Now, once you take your plants out, you have to have new plants ready to go in. And it's best if you can kind of keep them as a steady supply of plants going in. And it's recommended that you have a separate baby bed. And this can be a traditional style, just in the dirt, non-aquaponic style. This is a great example over here on the right. You can see that they're growing from very, very tiny little baby plants all the way up to the ready to harvest adults. And again, it's going to be a little hard to get this cycle going to start because you will need to have more plants in the end than you do in the beginning. But this is a great example. You can see all those baby plants getting put in as the larger plants are harvested. On to troubleshooting. So here is a very good reminder that plants use nitrates and phosphates. They do not use hormones from fish associated with spawning, stress, and injury. So you may still need to do water changes. However, having those plants there will significantly decrease the frequency or the amount that you're doing them. So again, it's going to depend on what season it is, how your fish are being kept. Are there too many fish in there? Is your water quality not quite right? Those hormones are going to be in the water, and if you're not taking them out on a regular basis, your fish will just get stressed, chronic stress, and then their immune system will plummet and you'll have a batch of sick fish on your hands. So you will probably need to do water changes, especially in the beginning while things are getting adjusted. And it's very important that getting that ratio of fish waste to plants perfect. Again, this is going to be kind of a rolling as we go, we'll see what happens kind of deal. It's extremely important that you monitor your nitrate levels daily and twice a day if possible, because during the day, the plants are going to use your nitrates to grow by photosynthesis. So using carbon dioxide and light, they magically grow and make water and oxygen. Great, all good. However, as soon as the sun goes down, the plants are going to be respirating using the oxygen in the water and could possibly outcompete your fish for it, provided that you do not have additional aeration on hand. So you can get a test kit for oxygen. They make chemical ones. They have little probes for that as well. If it's worth it to you and you considered that you might have a lot of veggies and a very small fish system, they can make oxygen sensors that are very cheap. They can connect to your smartphone, and basically it'll warn you if the oxygen levels are getting too low, especially in the middle of the night. So nothing's bad than going outside and seeing all the plants happy. Well, they're happy temporarily, and all your fish unfortunately have suffocated. If you have dying plants, you might not have enough fish waste. You can always consider increasing the diet or the number of fish. However, the more stress you create from overcrowding is going to create more hormone production, and this will eventually lead to more water changes. And again, it's going to be species dependent how much they can deal with being packed together. Please do not expect everything to work perfectly the first time around. Unfortunately, aquaponics has a little bit of a steep learning curve, and we're just making sure that you take things slowly to preserve the health of your fish. Certainly, having vegetables is great, conserving water is great, but really we want to make sure that these fish are in an appropriate environment. We highly suggest that you hire a professional to help you if you are intimidated. There are pond guys out there who have dabbled in aquaponics, but we recommend that you get somebody who has actually done it successfully and can take you to their facility, preferably on a commercial scale, and walk you through how many times they stumbled before they were able to get it right. There are aquaponics workshops available. There was a great one at Aquaculture America this past year. It had great reviews. But really, it's going to be about being creative and experiment with what system will work for you. Again, like I showed you, there's many different examples of how you can make aquaponics work for you. You just got to figure out which way is going to work best for your particular situation. Now, the veterinary side of things, this one little caveat is how we treat fish, sick fish in aquaponics systems. There are very limited treatment options due to the addition of plants. So obviously we can't dump a bunch of chemicals into the pond, into the water, because those are just going to go over to the veggies. And then when you eat those veggies, you're going to get sick too. So again, pretty much all of your water-based treatments are out. And that's just the way it is. So option number one for treating sick fish is if you are able to isolate the fish, and then you can do a water-based treatment, but you have to be able to supplement the plants with some of those hydroponic products we talked about in the beginning. You will have to give them synthetic nitrates and phosphates and all that until the fish treatment is over, and then some of them will have a withdrawal period after the fact. However, you might be able to treat with a dip-based injection or medicated feed treatment that will keep these products away from your plants that you're going to eat. And again, if you're going to be using any of these methods, it's really best that you consult with a veterinarian to figure out the option that is best for your fish. Because if you have a giant koi pond and you have 30 fish, we're not going dip-based, we're not going injection. We have to make sure that they can eat a medicated feed, because I don't want to have to inject all of those fish. There are options available to you that do not involve dumping a bunch of chemicals into your water. So you will, unfortunately, aquaponics does not mean that your fish will be healthy always. It will help their water quality and make them happier. However, unfortunately, just like people, no matter what you do, fish will get sick from time to time. So it's great if you have one of those quarantine systems set up, like we've talked about in the past, and you're able to get that fish out right away before anything spreads to the rest of the pond. And that system can be separated from your aquaponics entirely. So really important that you consider that your fish might get sick using this system. Some great resources that I used for writing this talk, really kind of the main cornerstone product available is the aquaponic gardening there on the left. Very well written, very well written for lay people. And then on the right there, this is a very thick, big book, but it will cover pretty much everything from very small scale productions into large commercial ventures. So again, this has been great, and hopefully I've inspired you to really get out there and try something. I'm very excited to try this in my own backyard, hopefully coming up. It will mean that I have to bring fish home though for the first time. So these are two great resources. Both are available on Amazon. If you have any additional resources that you'd like to share with us, I would love to have them. So please go ahead and answer in that question box if you have any additional resources you'd love to share with us. Now, toward the end here, we are offering our Fish Health Masterclass coming up on October 27th. It is all online. You don't even have to go anywhere. You can sit in bed with your cat, your dog, your fish, and learn about fish stuff. It is on our main page of our website. And with that, does anybody have any questions? I know this was kind of more a fun webinar on what you can do with your fish pond. But all right, so it's going to take me a minute to read some of these questions. All right, so the first question is on tilapia. Yes, tilapia is one of the most commonly used fish in aquaponics. It is thought to be a very hardy fish that can put up with a lot of, beginner's mistakes. Yes, they can be packed at a higher density than koi and goldfish. However, they are not disease intolerant entirely. We had a great presentation at the last International Symposium on Aquatic Animal Health on a bunch of tilapia farms out in Wisconsin. Unfortunately, tilapia like really warm water. They are usually in the 80 degrees, where plants are more in the 70 degrees. So by being in colder water, it made them more susceptible to disease, and they really weren't eating right and able to process their food. So again, yes, you could use tilapia. It has its own separate set of priorities, and I'm happy to give you some more people to contact that are tilapia specific. The other question is on, are there any versions of saltwater or brackish setups that you've heard of? I have not at this time. Salt and plants really don't mix well together. It would have to be either a type of plant that can really handle the salt well, and there are different plant varieties that can tolerate some levels of salt, but it would probably depend on what level of salt you wanted to keep it at and what exactly you wanted to grow. Unfortunately, yeah, just plants and salt don't mix very well, unfortunately. All right, one more question down the bottom. So this is, what is the best first step to getting an established koi pond to have an aquaponics system? Well, again, the best thing that you can do is figure out the volume of water that you have and the potential volume of plants that you could grow. Now, again, it's best if you could do that 1-to-1 ratio and really keep that water clean. But if it's not that important to you, you just want to start out and try it out for the first time, you can start very small and just set up maybe a 1-to-10 ratio where you have, a 10-to-1 where you have lots and lots of fish and just a little bit of veggies. Very easy. Start out. You can start with just one little barrel if you have it. Again, you can get one of these prefab systems. Really, the best thing is to figure out that 1-to-1 ratio and figure out how far that would go for you. And again, you can start small. It won't have the dramatic effect on your water changes, right off the bat. But you want to make sure that that you know how to do everything first. Next question. So this is someone who lives in a colder climate. And this is asking, so she's going to move the fish into another facility for the winter to keep them warm. And she wants to grow stuff either to keep the cycle running smoothly. So if this is, you want to keep the outdoor pond growing and there's no fish in it, you will have to supplement those with some of the hydroponic solutions. If this is going to be for the indoor system, indoor greenhouses are so much easier because you can manipulate the climate a lot more. I would definitely look into looking at some of those prefab systems that they have available. They make a lot for indoor systems. But yes, you can certainly do that in an indoor system. And if you want, you can just move all the plants outside when it gets nice and warm outside. Do I need to aerate the water for plants? So again, it will depend on what kind of system you are using. If it's just going to be kind of that float that sits just on the surface of the water, you will need to use an aerator because again, you're going to block where most of the diffusion from the air comes in. If you're using one of those kind of fill and drain, deeper or shallow beds, basically as the water drains out, it will be pulling in oxygen from the environment. So with that, you just want to make sure that your fish have enough oxygen, and it will depend on how your system is set up. Oh, this is such a tiny box. Oh, we have a great reference here. So Aquaponics Source in Colorado is a great place to go for systems and equipment. Thank you very much for that reference. Aquaponics Source in Colorado is great for some of these. Unfortunately, it looks some of these questions got cut off. There's one that looked like it was broken into multiple parts. Oh, this is interesting. Are things like axolotls suitable and or feasible for small aquaponics systems? I'm not sure. I think it would depend on what they are eating and how much waste they produce. I know in an article I wrote that they are a little bit more, what's the right word? Intolerant of different changes in their water quality. So again, it would kind of be dependent on how high you can get those levels up to. It might just depend on what plants you use that can suck those nitrates out very quickly. So there is an issue here of putting plants in the pond that would encourage fish to spawn. Yes, certainly that is a concern if you're using that float where the fish have access to the pond itself. If you're worried about that, you can always put the bed off to the side of the pond and just have it be a separate cycling system. That way you can keep the plants away from the fish and hopefully keep them, if you're trying to prevent them from spawning, it'll also prevent them from eating the plants. So lots of great questions here. There is a question about a couple different products here. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with them. If you want to go ahead and email me those specific products, I can get you more information on that. And with that, are there any more questions? Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining in on our Aquaponics and Fish webinar. I believe our next one coming up in October hasn't been announced yet. So if we are looking for topics for next year as well, so please make sure if you have any ideas, please let us know. If you go to fishvetstore.com/education, we have a list of all of our webinars coming up. And on the bottom there is a comment place where you can actually add your suggestions in. So thank you so much for attending our webinar today, and I hope you all have a lovely day.